Hello and welcome to Heroes of the Coast. I'm Janet Bridgers with Earth Alert, and I am delighted to have another true action hero as my guest today, Don May.
Delighted to be here, Janet.
Thanks for driving in.
Of course.
Don, we are going to talk today about someone that you had the pleasure and advantage of knowing personally, one of the greatest environmental heroes we've ever known, David Brower.
The Arch Druid, absolutely. Was a mentor to many, many, many folks, so I was very privileged to be amongst them.
For people who are not familiar, let's do a brief rundown of David Brower's career.
Mm-hmm. He was a climber. I knew him first as when I was a rock climber, and in fact, I believe the only worthwhile part of the Sierra Club was the rock climbing section. And if you look through the book of First Ascents in the Sierra, you'll see at least half of them have David Brower and Norman Clyde, the two of the most prominent climbers. David was active in the 14th Mountain Troops and taught
in World War II.
World War II, taught the military how to move safely across mountains on ski mountaineering. Came back and became a long-term quarter-century executive director of the Sierra Club, and which is where I first knew him. In fact, beside being a hero because of his mountaineering exploits, a lot of us that romped around in the Sierras, bagging peaks and that sort of thing, developed a sense of territoriality, belief that those are all belong to us personally. And David started bringing large quantities of people back there, and they became famous for these outings and campfire singing and all of this. Like ants, they'd come over the mountains. And so I went down to complain about that and say, and David explained that, as he has to many other folks, that if people don't know a place, they will never love it. And if they don't love it, they'll never fight for it. And any time that you want to save one of the erstwhile places, you'd best start taking tours out there and introducing it to a large number of people. Or when it comes to the political showdown that eventually happens, you're going to be there by yourself.
Mm-hmm. And he developed, something that is now very common to all of us, techniques for bringing a lot of people to beautiful places. And tell us about that.
Well, I don't...
I'm talking about photography and film.
Well, photography, yes. As a matter of fact, that depending on which side you were on, what David did was perhaps, I think it all comes into context with a fight over Glen Canyon, and which taught us all a lot, and more particularly David, I think, because up until that time, the Sierra Club had really been a lot of an insider organization, particularly back in the days when my father and a lot of others were, not a lot of others, it was a small group. Mm-hmm. And you had to be invited to join. And any member who objected blackballed you out of the organization. So it was a very small, tight group who believed in consensus. We had a large number of very famous heads of the Department of Interior secretaries of the Department of Interior came out of the Sierra Club, and they always worked behind the scenes very quietly and all of that. David changed that and built a large membership, built a very democratic one that anyone that's dealt with the club knows what their ponderous processes and all this consensus. And I think while that's extremely important, that was a lot of the undoing, and it started with Glen Canyon Dam and the drowning of the river. And after a long and difficult fight, there was a compromise made to save the Rainbow Bridge and inundate Glen Canyon. And David realized that that was an error, and the popular reason for doing this being for recreation, to get people to be able to see this backcountry. And he ran a series of national ads that said, should we flood the Sistine Chapel to get the tourists nearer the ceiling? And it just brought people together across the country, and support was disappearing, and it was rushed to the floor, and it passed by a couple votes. And all of us, but particularly David, learned from that compromise is not a virtue, or as they said, extremism in defense of the earth is not a vice. And that was the beginning of a sharp division. The next day, the IRS pulled the Sierra Club's tax status. A lot of folks said, David, you've done it now, and fired him over that. And a lot of the rest of us, I was chaired the Angeles chapter water committee, and was involved in the water wars, and was having difficulties with things like a California aqueduct and peripheral canals and that kind of thing. But particularly nuclear power plants that some of us had come to find were devoid of any redeeming features. And the old guard, of course, still looked at nuclear power as the opportunity to save our wild rivers and clean up the air and make energy too cheap to meter and all of that. And as one of my friends said, and the books, Don, don't forget the books. And,
what do you mean?
Well, David introduced, after Glen Canyon, he did a book with Elliot Porter called The Place Nobody Knew. Mm-hmm. And that's what happened. We have a gorgeous place on the face of the earth that nobody was aware of, and so we lost it. And he introduced what has become known as coffee table books, exhibit format books, that I found out were a wonderful way of opening the door to legislators, bringing in and giving them one of these beautiful books, giving them to influential people, was a wonderful way to open the door to conversations about conservation. Well, a lot of people felt that he had virtually bankrupted the club over his book policy. And eventually, of course, the club not only got all their money back, but a good return on it, but it took a long time. Most importantly, it convinced a lot of people that there were a lot of places on this earth that are worth fighting for. So, and it also gave folks like Elliot Porter a great venue for his magnificent photographs. And of course, Ansel Adams that was involved for a long time.
There were a lot of national parks that he helped formed, including, here's a list: Kings Canyon, the North Cascades, the Redwoods, Great Basin, Alaska, Cape Cod, Fire Island, the Golden Gate, and Point Reyes. And Point Reyes alone would qualify him for a spot as a hero of the coast here in California. But you had the opportunity not just to work with him, but to know him more personally. Tell us some of the stories about how did you happen to spend time with David Brower?
Well, it started, of course, after he was summarily thrown out of the Sierra Club, and a lot of his followers, myself amongst them, had a meeting in the meadow in Yosemite Valley, and to talk about what we would do, and decided a successor organization, Friends of the Earth, that would not seek tax status and would openly advocate and push for things and be an advocate for environmental causes, the things that 501c3s, nonprofits, can't do. A C4 is nonprofit, but is not tax deductible. And so we did. That formed Friends of the Earth, and David, as was his wont, handed out little mementos that I should have brought that one in. He gave each of us a stone from the bottom of Glen Canyon, and made us promise that one day we'd put it back when the river was running free. And a seed that came from Wawona, redwood seed, with the admonition that we should take it back to our homes and plant it and build an organization that would grow as the Wawona grew. And we did that, and that redwood, to my ex-wife's dismay, that grows in her backyard now, is a good-sized tree, and overwhelming a small backyard. But indeed, that thought of building organizations. And also there was other things that came out of that meeting in terms of looking at different types of, every organization is like a tool. And if there was one thing that David was good at, it's giving people a toolbox of those things they would need to be effective environmentalists, not conservationists, I should say, because up until that time, we were all conservationists, seeking to preserve and husbandry of natural resources, and it was those who felt that were active preservationists, if you would, active environmentalists, had gone way beyond conservation. And the old guard at Sierra Club still, because a lot of those, all those fights that, one in particular I think is perhaps gives you an idea of that. California condors were disappearing, right? They're in decline. They were down to the last 86 condors. And the Sierra Club and Audubon and a lot of the big green organizations decided that the thing to do is to go catch them all and put them into cages and breed them, captive breeding, so they could save the species. And virtually everyone associated with David's new organization, Friends of the Earth, had said, no, that's not the way. Condors should fly free. What you should do is save the land that they need, save their habitat, remove the stress that's wiping them out, because it's man's footprint on the mountains is what's causing the condor to disappear. And we lost, of course, but we were right, because in catching those condors, they lost 50 of them. I think there was about 30 that survived, something like that, in cages. And it's taken them these many years, what's it been, quarter century or so, to finally build it back to the numbers that both the ones that have been released and the ones that are still in cages. There is now almost the same number, a few less, condors alive as at the very inception of the captive breeding program. Not to say that they would have survived. Mm-hmm. But had we saved the Sespe and a lot of their range, they'd sure had a lot better chance at it. And that's basically one of the thoughts that David imbued in people was that, let nature take its course, but if you could stay the hand of unwise development and human incursion that was destroying the environment, that's what you need to concentrate on.
Now you've brought this rather interesting relic with you as one of your souvenirs. Tell us about this, Don.
Well, it was often said that if the Sierra Club was really a 2x4, about 4 feet long, it would be a whole lot more effective than the organization that it is. One of the wonderful things about David is he introduced us all to a lot of very colorful folks, Aldo Leopold and David Foreman, and a guy by the name of Edward Abbey. And Abbey this is just after the founding. When we founded Friends of the Earth, there was a PR firm by the name of Gossage and Mander, and they were nice enough to give us the old firehouse up in San Francisco free as an. This is not only the first historic building in San Francisco, and one of the few things that survived the big earthquake and fire, but and it's historic building number one. Still had the old fire pole and all of that. And at our inauguration, there was people that put their signed their signature, Aldo Leopold, and a number of Nobel laureates and wonderful people. Amongst them was Ed Abbey, and several of us that were there who, can I say that, have been known to take direct action to do things. And Ed Abbey gave us a monkey wrench and encouraged us to, following David's advice that extremism is in defense of the earth is no vice, that we should set about using this wrench where it was.
Well, that's a very controversial topic, and but I love this this quote from David that, if I can find it, about the only mark that polite environmentalists, conservationists make is the scars in the earth that
scars upon the earth that are left behind. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that and another one I'm not sure was originally his, but that at the end of our time, you'll look back and not upon the things that you have done, but the things that you did not do and should have. And that was his biggest remorse, was places like Glen Canyon and a few others that where the club should have taken strong action and instead went for the compromise, for the consensus, for the saved half of it at the expense, really, of the whole. And interesting, in Abby's book, The Monkey Wrench Gang, there was a number of us that became staffers for the Friends of the Earth that showed up in that book. You can recognize some of the.
I'll have to go back and read.
Well, one of them was one of the irritating things on the highway from L.A. to Phoenix was nonstop billboards, and several folks, I won't mention who all they were, but got some chainsaws and started off in the other side of the San Gabriels and sawed down every billboard all the way to Phoenix.
This is part of Lady Bird Johnson's beautification program?
Exactly. And some of the things were a little more permanent than that. And, you know, when, and this was again one of David's teachings, that you look around, often we win these battles not through our own overt efforts, but because our enemies, our adversaries, tend to shoot themselves in the foot. And David pointed out that whenever people are waving artillery around or assembling it to use against you, sometimes it is appropriate to reach over and pull a trigger when it's pointed at something other than you. And I think that all of us have found over the years that it's been those occasions where we've managed to pull a trigger on an adversary's artillery that has been much more effective than what we've been able to do through persuasion.
Now, give us a couple more examples of that. What exactly do you mean by that?
I don't know if I used to be that corporations depended on their computers, this big growling monster that was down in their basement that the managers didn't understand. And of course, things that you don't understand that are quite powerful, we tend to deify. And in those days, these were card-oriented systems where you had a big long, remember those big stacks of IBM cards?
I learned to key punching.
Well, yes, and it turns out that there was one particular company who utilized the residue from high sulfur oil that was refined in the El Segundo refinery, and across the street was Allied Chemicals sulfur Klaus recovery unit that was responsible for about 90% of the sulfoxide emissions to the South Coast Air Basin. And somebody managed to have some cards slipped into the deck to print out for Thron Riggs, the director, every morning, the performance stuff for a very highly protected managerial status reports. And all of a sudden popped up on his desk a little thing that said, if you don't quit selling your sulfur to Allied Chemical across the way, we're going to wipe out the discs. Well, it turns out that Chevron Oil was, at that time, was running 8 to 10 days of overlap in their cash flow. And if you erased their credit records, and it would have to go back, they wouldn't recover. It would have bankrupted them. And the thought that they were vulnerable to somebody wiping out their credit records caused them to indeed stop selling sulfur. And for the cost of a 1/4 inch of cards, a little Hollerith character slipped into the stack. The 90% of the choking sulfur in the South Coast Air Basin went away.
Damn good use of resources, Don.
I don't know who did that, but it was.
Tell us, you said that you learned a lot about tools in a larger sense from David Brower. Is there anything else you'd like to share with us about that?
Well, sure. That's it. There are lots of different types of organizations around. Some of them look at building memberships to the point that they could sustain cash flow and have scientists that can take part in this big complex process that grinds on. And there's other community-based groups that are a little more nimble on their feet and a little more prone to direct action. There is a place in this world for all of those, and as one of my favorite of David's quotes was, I love splinter groups, you can't capture us all. And in fact, that's what happens when organizations get founded to solve a particular problem, and as they get into that, they become compromised, but they also become effective in a very narrow sense. So you need a lot of different organizations. And in fact, there is a place, as there was with Friends of the Earth Foundation, that set up a foundation that took tax-deductible funds to fund the growth of new organizations. There was, and this was one that I happened to be one of the pushers for. The Sierra Club was also very much afraid of direct political action, and I'd always been felt if you don't get your hands dirty, if you don't get directly involved walking precincts and setting up phone banks and directly raising funds for good candidates, that you couldn't hope to really have any influence when it came time for legislation. So we set up a political action committee, the League of Conservation Voters.
Oh, and that's been so effective.
It has. And
Tremendous legacy there.
Part of it was another one of David's, Marion Eddy, that we had the good fortune to run across and put in charge of League of Conservation Voters, and that and Clean Water Action that built a lot of the effectiveness, certainly of the Dirty Dozen campaigns. And of course the state and local leagues that have brought that action down to a local level.
Don, see, I knew we could talk about David Brower for hours. Unfortunately, we are in the last minute of this program. Thank you again for bringing these stories to us.
Of course.
Viewers, thank you for watching. And remember, extremism in the defense of the earth is no vice.